left hand because that's where the traffic is. Left turn, just point left. Right turn, remember the blinker. And then the awkward one is stopping. They start making their trips up and down the river. Years have gone by. Iberville, the older brother, contracts yellow fever in 1706. Yellow fever was caused by mosquitoes. This is a mosquito-infested swamp. People were dropping like flies. Bienville, he's now in his 20s. He is left in charge to finish the mission of colonizing Louisiana. So he's been coming up and down the river for years. Along the way, he has started to befriend the Native Americans, the natives in this area. So they start communicating. The natives were watching the French for years. She was born here in 1911. She grew up not in this neighborhood. We're in the Treme neighborhood. She grew up in a neighborhood called the Black Pearl. Black Pearl is very poor. She had about 15 born here in 1901, 10 years before Mahalia. And he grew up in Treme. He grew up in this neighborhood. The neighborhood's very famous. They call it the birthplace of jazz. It's also the oldest African-American neighborhood in the United States. Two slaves there, George and Marie. We know that George and Marie were the very first slaves into the territory. When Bienville, 20 years later, decided to build the city here, he brought thousands of slaves, mostly from West Africa, in a very short period of time. So what he decided to do was enact a set of laws. The set of laws was called the Code Noir, the Black Code. And this was a book that governed how slaves were to be treated, gave them some basic rights, and it also said that when a slave lands here, he must be baptized Catholic. Upstairs in the back, so not the one with the balcony, and it was $1,100 for a very basic one bedroom. So that tells you about how much things cost here. Pretty expensive on this street. The reason being, it's a very historic street. Esplanade Avenue, this was the High Road. St. Louis number 3, this is the third cemetery of the city. The St. Louis cemeteries are all run by the Catholic Church, but not all cemeteries are run this way. But this one, you don't have to be Catholic to be buried in. It's just run by the Archdiocese. So I'm going to explain how we're buried in New Orleans. It's a myth that we're all buried above ground. That is not true. A lot of people think that, but a lot of us are buried this way. But it's just the way the French did it. So when the French got here, they built their cemeteries like they had them back home. So if you went to an old cemetery in France, this is what you'd see. So as we ride toward the back of the cemetery, you're going to see below ground burials because not everybody can afford one of these big tombs. But if you look down the row, you're going to see most of the tombs are this size, family tombs. And then the tombs that are big, like this big white one here with multiple shelves, these are called society tombs. And that's nothing more than a grouping of people who want to be buried together. Could be the Firemen's Association, could be all Italian people, all Greeks, whatever. It's just a group of people who want to be buried together. This cemetery has a lot of society tombs of nuns and priests, a lot of religious buried here. So the Minot tomb, this is a family tomb, and if you could picture this cover off, there's probably two shelves, one on top of the other, for bodies, for caskets, small caskets. So how many people are buried in the Minot family tomb? We're going to count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You always have to check the sides. This was probably the original cover. And once they filled it, they moved it on the side. What did I say, 7 over here?
Yeah.
8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 people. So how did 14 people fit in this 2-shelf tomb? So how it happens is, first person who died was in 1874, 24 years after the cemetery opened, and Marie. So Marie went in the top shelf. And then the second person, John, quite a few decades later, he went in the second shelf. So now it's full. So what happens when the third person, another Marie, just a couple years later, what happens when she dies? Well, there's no room for her. So whoever's been in here the longest, which was John, he comes out. It's been decades since John went in. So this is a long period of time. These conditions in the summer, very hot. Kind of like a cremation that has happened over a long period of time. Just didn't happen right off the bat. So what is left is just ash of the remains. So if they're
bones? The bones decay too?
They decay. So if John went into a casket, whatever's left of the casket is burned, and then John's remains, mostly ash, are compacted, and they're put in an individual vessel, a box, a bag, an urn, whatever the family wants to put him in, and then he goes all the way to the back or to the side to make room for another body.
How is it?
Time frame for Edgar Degas. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm the owner.
Oh, hi. First name. Stopped here to show you a Katrina X. We don't see a lot of these anymore. Most of them have been painted over. But still some of them linger. During the storm, or right after the storm, all the cell towers were down. It was very difficult to communicate with anyone. The authorities were having the same difficulty, especially since they were coming from different agencies. We had Canadian RCMP, we had police units, we had military units. They were all here searching houses. So they devised a way to mark the house after they searched it, so the next people at this house would know that it was searched, or this building. So they would put an X on the building. My grandfather's house had one, my mother's house had one, my sister's house, every single building in New Orleans had one of these. And they put the date at the top, 9/10, this was about 12 days after the storm. August 29th is when the storm hit. The CA-8 on the left, that was some kind of, probably a military unit. There's one over here that says LSP, Louisiana State Police. It's just who searched the house. And then the COM, the one on the right quadrant, I have no idea what that means. That was some kind of hazard, just something they needed to get across. It was a code for something. And then usually there's a number down here, and that's how many people, bodies they found at the house. Named after Claude Treme. Claude Treme was a Creole. He owned all this property right outside of the city. He saw an opportunity with the free people of color. He started subdividing his property and selling small pieces of it to the free people of color. And this is how it became the oldest African-American neighborhood in the United States. So the free people of color, they're building their neighborhoods, early 1800s. They also built this church, St. Augustine Catholic Church. This church opened in 1842. And back in 1842, in Catholic churches, you had to pay for your spot on the bench. So you rented your space on the pews, pew fees. Massacre House.
Known as what?
Sultan's Massacre. Very dark story. It was this house right here, the Sultan's Massacre. So if you were to take a haunted history tour, this would probably be on it. So this house was owned by a wealthy plantation owner in the 1830s. So this was his city house. He was only using it to come to the city to go to the opera. So he wasn't living in it. At some point in the 1830s, he decided to rent it out. He rented it to a man who identified himself as a sultan from Turkey. So the Sultan moved in the house, put heavy drapes in all the windows, iron bars in all the windows and doors, and he started having these big parties every night. He was a party animal. He had a harem of beautiful women, he had young boys in the house. Every night, lots of people, lots of music. Neighbors got used to it being a very loud house. So one night, a neighbor was walking by and noticed how quiet the house was, which was very unusual. So she did a little investigating. She looks up, she notices something dripping from one of the balconies. It was blood. She calls the police. Police come in, they break down the door. What they found inside was a brutal murder scene. Dozens of people, every single one in the house was brutally murdered. We're talking severed heads, severed limbs, blood everywhere. Everyone in the house was dead. When they found the Sultan's body, he was the only body that wasn't mutilated. He was buried in the courtyard behind the house. When they did the post-mortem, they discovered that he was buried while he was alive because he had so much dirt in his lungs and throat. So pretty brutal crime scene. So they did a big investigation. First they thought it had to be pirates. Who else would do this? But then they found out after a lot of digging, the Sultan was an imposter. He was the brother of the real Sultan, stole his brother's fortune, and was living in hiding, this crazy lavish lifestyle on his brother's dime.